Chapter 1. The Unexpected Encounter. The universe had always been a vast, intimidating expanse, stretching endlessly beyond the comprehension of any single living being. For Darius Lennox, a human explorer stationed on the fringes of known space, this isolation was both his solace and his curse. A solitary figure drifting between the stars, his ship, the Ether's Edge, was his only companion. It was a sleek, multi-purpose vessel, engineered for exploration, its metallic hull gleaming under the dim starlight as it sliced through the vastness of the galaxy. Months had passed since Darius had seen another human, months since he had felt the warmth of human interaction, months since he had even shared a passing glance with anyone. This was his life now. Alone, exploring the deepest corners of the cosmos, charting systems no one else had the curiosity or the audacity to venture toward. He had come to find peace in the silence of space, a silence so profound it drowned out the thoughts that plagued him when he was on Earth. Out here, in the cold vastness, his past didn't matter. His mistakes, his regrets, they seemed so insignificant in comparison to the stars that surrounded him. And yet, no matter how far he journeyed into this uncharted wilderness, a part of him always wondered if someone, would eventually find him, something beyond the stars. It was a routine trip, one of many. He had set his course for the uninhabited system of Cass, a small, otherwise insignificant system on the very edge of known space. It was a lonely, desolate place, home to a few gas giants and barren planets, each one devoid of life. Perfect for his research. Perfect for finding something new. But as he piloted his vessel into the system, something caught his attention. A faint signal, weak and sporadic, interspersed with static and noise, but unmistakable nonetheless. A distress signal. It was coming from one of the planets, an ancient, forgotten world buried in the middle of nowhere. His fingers hovered over the console, hesitating for only a moment. There was no logical reason to investigate. It could be a malfunction, a remnant of an ancient technology no longer in use, or a stray burst of cosmic radiation. But curiosity, that primal urge that had driven mankind for millennia, flared within him. His decision was made within the blink of an eye, his mind already shifting into the mode of an explorer. He couldn't ignore it, not when there was even a small chance that someone, somewhere, needed help. Maybe I'll finally meet someone out here, Darius muttered to himself, though the thought had more a hint of hope than any real expectation. The planets in this system had been scouted 1,000 times over. No civilization had ever been found here. The signal, if it was truly coming from this planet, was an anomaly. But anomalies, to explorers like him, were treasures waiting to be unearthed. He adjusted the ship's course, aligning it with the source of the transmission. As the Ether's Edge neared the planet's atmosphere, Darius felt a slight jolt, the ship's sensors buzzing as they picked up the planet's strange electromagnetic field. This planet, which had been classified as uninhabitable by every prior survey, had something hidden beneath its surface. He tried to analyze the data, but the interference from the planet's ionosphere made it difficult to pinpoint exactly what was causing the disturbance. He would need to land if he wanted any real answers. His ship descended into the atmosphere, the outside world growing darker as the thick clouds began to roll over the surface of the planet. The sky below was a swirling storm of dust and volatile energy, dark clouds filled with bursts of static electricity, lit up by flashes of lightning. Darius had to keep his focus as the ship's controls fought against the forces of nature, but his determination remained strong. He was here to investigate. He was here to find the source of the signal. The planet seemed hostile, its landscape barren and seemingly lifeless, but he wouldn't let it deter him. He was a professional, someone who had seen every kind of planet, from the frozen tundras of icy worlds to the molten surfaces of volcanic giants. This was just another test. The descent was smooth, surprisingly so, considering the storm raging around him. The Ether's Edge landed on a rocky outcrop, the landing gears scraping against the jagged stone below as the ship settled into place. Silence followed. The noise of the storm outside was muffled by the ship's hull, and for the first time in what felt like days, Darius let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He powered down the systems, unstrapped himself from his seat, and made his way toward the rear airlock. He slipped into his environmental suit, ensuring all seals were tight. The air outside was toxic, unbreathable for humans, but he had prepared for this. He grabbed his blaster, an essential tool for any explorer, something he hadn't had to use in a long while, and made his way to the exit ramp. The ship's lights flickered off, leaving the airlock bathed in an eerie blue glow as he descended the ramp and stepped out onto the barren surface of the planet. The planet was nothing like he had expected. The terrain was rugged, covered in deep fissures and sharp rocks, and there was no sign of life anywhere. No plants, no animals, not even the faintest trace of microbial life in the soil. It was an ancient, long-dead world. The only sound was the howling wind, carrying the scent of dust and decay. His boots crunched against the cracked earth as he surveyed the surroundings. In the distance, a large structure rose from the surface, partially obscured by the swirling storm. It was old, far older than anything he had seen before. It appeared to be made of a material that didn't quite belong, a metallic sheen glinting under the storm's electric flashes. The signal had originated from there. He was sure of it. His heart quickened with excitement. The ruins were far from anything he had seen before. Not a natural formation, but a relic of some kind, ancient, forgotten, maybe even dangerous. Still, Darius couldn't turn back now. His curiosity had already drawn him too deep. He made his way toward the structure, every step kicking up dust and debris. The storm had intensified, the howling winds pushing against him, but he pressed on, his eyes focused ahead. The closer he got, the more the building seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the structure resonating with some kind of low hum, almost like it was alive. His hand hovered near the blaster at his side, ready for whatever might be waiting inside. When he reached the entrance, he stopped in front of an archway, its stone frame adorned with symbols he didn't recognize. They were carved deep into the surface, worn with age, but still legible, as though the language they used had somehow transcended time. The air around him felt charged, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through his bones. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the ancient ruin. Inside, the walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, shimmering faintly in the darkness. The architecture was unlike anything from Earth. Curved, fluid lines spiraled upward, creating pathways that seemed to twist and wind through the air itself. It was beautiful in its strangeness, and Darius couldn't help but wonder who or what had built it. As he ventured deeper into the structure, he heard a soft sound, a rustling, followed by a faint clicking. Something was moving. He instinctively reached for his blaster, his heart hammering in his chest. The sound grew louder, and then, from around the corner of a shadowed alcove, a figure appeared. It was small, no more than a foot tall, and at first, Darius thought it was some kind of robotic construct. But then it moved again, and he realized it was a living being. It was an alien, with skin that shimmered a soft green, its eyes large and round, reflecting the faint light from the glowing symbols. It wore strange, tattered clothing, and from its posture, Darius could tell it was terrified. The alien's eyes locked onto Darius, and its tiny form froze in place. Its hands trembled slightly, and Darius could see its rapid breathing through the thin fabric of its clothes. "You're not real," the alien whispered in a voice so faint, Darius almost didn't catch it. It looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "You're going to eat me, aren't you?" Darius blinked in confusion. "What?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. "No, I'm not. What are you talking about?" The alien's wide eyes filled with panic as it backed up against the wall. "The stories. The humans. They devour everything." The alien's voice was trembling now, full of terror. "I was told they would. I was told you would devour me." Darius took a step forward, confused but also feeling a sense of protectiveness for this tiny creature. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently, lowering his weapon slowly, trying to reassure the creature. But the alien didn't seem to hear him. It was shaking now, its tiny hands clutching at its chest as it huddled into the corner. Please don't eat me," it whimpered. Darius's heart softened at the sight of the terrified being. He took another step forward, his voice now full of concern. "I'm not going to eat you. I promise. I'm here to help." The alien hesitated, its fearful gaze flickering to his blaster and then back to his face, as if it was trying to decide if his words were true. Slowly, it lowered its arms, the tension in its tiny body easing just a fraction. "I don't understand," Darius said, kneeling to get closer to the tiny being. "Why did you think I would eat you?" The alien, still shaking, looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "All humans, they devour us, like the stories say. They come to take, to consume." Darius was stunned, speechless for a moment. Then, as the realization hit him, he understood. The alien was afraid, not of him specifically, but of humans in general. The stories of human violence, of conquest and destruction, had been passed down across countless species, and this tiny creature had been indoctrinated to believe the worst. It was terrified of him, as if he was some kind of monstrous entity that existed solely to devour its kind. But things had gone wrong. The fear that had gripped the tiny alien was only the beginning. Something larger, something unexpected, was about to unfold. Darius crouched lower, taking a measured step back, his eyes softening with an unspoken realization. He wasn't used to being misunderstood like this, not to this degree. A small alien, trembling in front of him, was convinced he would devour it, as if the very thought of his presence signaled imminent danger. He had studied alien life forms, but nothing had prepared him for an encounter quite like this. Hey, Darius said gently, keeping his tone calm and soothing as he slowly placed his blaster back in its holster. He didn't want to scare the creature any more than it already was. He didn't even know what this tiny alien was, what its species was called, but he couldn't allow it to think he was a threat. "I'm not here to hurt you," he repeated, taking another cautious step back, lowering himself to one knee to bring himself to eye level with the alien. It was so small, no more than a foot in height, and its glowing eyes shone with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The fear was still overwhelming, though, and it made Darius' heart ache in ways he hadn't anticipated. The alien, still huddled against the wall, kept its wide eyes locked on him. The way it moved, or rather, didn't move, showed just how much it feared him. It was like he was staring at a small animal that had been backed into a corner, unsure if it could trust the giant that loomed over it. It was shaking, its hands clutching at its thin clothing as though it was preparing for some final defense. "Look, I don't even know what you're afraid of," Darius continued, now dropping his voice to a whisper. I'm not like the other humans, okay? I won't harm you." The alien blinked, clearly not convinced. All humans, they take us?" it said, its voice quiet and laced with raw fear. "They take us to feed their hunger, they devour all of us." Darius' brows furrowed as he processed the words. A chill ran down his spine. The stories, he had heard of rumors from the outer colonies about human-like creatures consuming entire civilizations, and now, standing in front of him was proof that somewhere in the depths of this galaxy, such tales had found their way into alien folklore. Fear had passed from species to species, becoming as real as the monsters in the night. But Darius was no monster. "I swear, I don't want to hurt you. I just came to explore," Darius said, his voice trembling slightly, now realizing the absurdity of the situation. He had expected strange, hostile aliens, maybe even combat, but not this fragile being, trembling in terror, convinced of an inevitable fate at the hands of his species. What had they seen that made them think this way? He stood up, his mind racing. "I'm a human, yes," he said, his voice steadying, "but I don't know what stories you've heard. I don't feed on others. I don't devour anything. Please, let me help." The alien, after a long moment of hesitation, blinked again, uncertainty crossing its face. Its hands stopped shaking slightly, but it didn't move from its corner. Its large eyes studied him more intensely now, as though weighing his words, the air heavy with the decision it was about to make. "I won't hurt you," Darius reassured it again. "Just tell me your name, please." The tiny alien hesitated, and then, with a deep breath, it whispered, "Miri." Darius let out a soft breath of relief. The creature's voice, though faint and fragile, was a sign of communication, of understanding that it wasn't ready to surrender to fear just yet. He smiled faintly, his heart lifting just a little. "Well, Miri," Darius said, the name rolling off his tongue. "I'm Darius. I'm here to help you, but you have to trust me. Can you do that?" Miri didn't respond immediately, her large eyes still wide with uncertainty. But for the first time, Darius saw the slightest glimmer of hope in them, like a flicker of light in the dark. It wasn't much, but it was something. He could work with this. I'm not your enemy, he continued gently, lowering his voice. I promise. Chapter 2. Understanding the Fear. Darius didn't know how long he sat there, just talking to Miri, trying to reassure her, but with each passing minute, he began to understand just how deep the alien's fear ran. It was ingrained into her very being, a fear that had shaped her existence, her species' perception of humanity. It had been passed down through generations, stories of human conquerors and devourers, painting every human as the same merciless, hungry for conquest, and always ready to consume. Miri finally allowed Darius to take a few steps closer. Her trembling had lessened, but her posture remained guarded, ready to retreat at any moment. But there was a flicker of something new in her gaze, something uncertain but curious, as if she was testing whether his words held truth. Her glowing eyes, still wide with wariness, tracked his every move, yet she didn't immediately flee. I've never seen anything like you before, Darius muttered, his voice filled with wonder. He was still awestruck by her appearance. Miri was beautiful in a way he hadn't expected. Her skin shimmered with a soft iridescence, a pale blue hue that seemed to reflect the faintest light, like moonlight over still water. Her delicate limbs, though tiny, were slender and strong, and the way she moved with such precision made Darius think that perhaps there was more to her species than simple fear. You're not what I expected, he continued, his tone gentle. I didn't come to conquer you or to harm you. I just came to explore. Miri's eyes flickered again, her expression still guarded, but something in her seemed to relax. Perhaps it was the way Darius had handled the situation, or perhaps it was the first time someone had shown her kindness without a hidden agenda. She lowered her arms slightly, though still keeping a distance, but her voice was more steady when she spoke next. You are different, she whispered, her voice still soft, but no longer filled with pure terror. Not like the others. Darius nodded, feeling a rush of relief mixed with sorrow. It was clear that the stories Miri had heard, the legends passed down from her species, were not mere tales. They were real, born from experiences her people had endured at the hands of humanity's darker history. How could they not be? He thought. The history of conquest, of colonization, was something humanity had long since tried to move past, but the damage it had done to other species still lingered, and perhaps it always would. Where did these stories come from, Miri? Darius asked carefully, his curiosity now taking precedence over his initial confusion. Why did you think we were all like that? Miri hesitated before answering, her large eyes clouded with memories she didn't want to relive. My people, my race, the Yiri, we were once free, explorers like you, she said, her voice trembling. But humans, they came to our world, to my home. They took us. They consumed us. My kind, we were small, easy to capture. They took so many of us. Darius' heart sank, guilt flooding through him at the revelation. This alien creature, so small, so vulnerable, had experienced the darkest side of humanity. His mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle clicked together. Miri wasn't just afraid of him, she was terrified of humanity as a whole, her people's tragic history of being taken, enslaved, and consumed by humans. I didn't know, Darius whispered, struggling to find the right words, but that wasn't us. That wasn't me. I'm sorry. I didn't know what happened to your people. Miri nodded slowly, her wide, luminous eyes filled with a kind of quiet sadness. No one knew, she whispered, but now, we're all alone. I'm all that's left. Darius reached into his pack, pulling out a small ration of food. He offered it to her, extending his hand slowly to avoid alarming her. You don't have to be alone, he said, his voice gentle. I'm not here to harm you. I can help. We can help each other. There was a long, tense pause before Miri finally moved. Tentatively, her tiny hands reached out, and she took the food from his palm. It wasn't much, just a simple protein bar, but it was a start. And for the first time, Darius saw her relax just a fraction. You're different, she repeated, her voice tinged with something that might have been hope. I'm not like the others, Darius affirmed, his heart swelling with empathy for this tiny alien, this survivor. And I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. As they stood together, Darius couldn't help but wonder what else lay ahead for the two of them. His mission had just taken an unexpected turn, one that would reshape the way he viewed his species and its place in the galaxy. He had come to explore, but now, he was here for something more important. And perhaps, just perhaps, this tiny alien woman might teach him more about humanity than he had ever expected. The silence that hung between Darius and Miri was a fragile one, delicate as glass, but it was a silence filled with understanding. It was clear now that the fear Miri felt was not one that could be easily erased by simple words. It was a fear that had been etched into her very being, built on the bones of her people's history, an ancestral terror passed down through generations. And now, in the presence of Darius, it was being confronted, challenged, in ways that neither of them fully understood. Darius watched her eat, her tiny hands trembling as she took cautious bites of the food he had offered. She had eaten sparingly, her eyes darting up to meet his every few seconds, as if expecting him to suddenly change, to revert to some version of the monsters she had been told humans were. His heart ached at the thought. He knew the history, he knew that humanity's past was filled with dark chapters, some of which were written in the blood of the very people who had trusted them. But the truth, as he was beginning to see, was more complicated than that. It wasn't just about the actions of a few, it was about the perception of an entire species, an idea that had spread far and wide, planting seeds of hatred and fear where there should have been trust and communication. Miri, Darius began, his voice gentle, what happened to your people? How did they end up like this? She hesitated, the food in her hands still, and for a long moment, Darius wondered if she would answer at all. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, laden with grief and memory. We were once like you, Miri said, her voice trembling. The Yiri were explorers, peaceful, curious. We traveled across the stars, visiting planets, learning, growing. We helped other species, shared our knowledge. But when humanity discovered us, things changed. Darius remained silent, listening intently. He could feel her words cut through the air, each syllable heavy with sorrow. They came to our homeworld, to Jirak, Miri continued, her eyes distant, her gaze unfocused as if she was seeing the past unfold before her again. At first, they said they wanted to trade, to establish peaceful relations. They didn't tell us they were running out of resources, that they needed our planet's energy reserves. They didn't tell us that they had been waging wars with their own kind for centuries. They came in the night, with their ships, their weapons. Darius swallowed, the weight of her words pressing heavily on him. He could feel the bitterness, the hurt in her voice, and it stirred something in him, a desire to understand, to bridge this gap of history between their species. They attacked, Miri whispered, almost too quietly for him to hear. They took us, hundreds of us. The Yiri were small, fragile, easy to capture. They kept us in cages, in ships, and took us away. They said they wanted to study us, to use us for their experiments. We were nothing to them. A resource. Darius felt a sharp pang in his chest, a deep ache that made him feel as though the ground beneath him was shifting. He had heard stories of humanity's early days, of exploration, of conquest, of colonization, stories that painted a dark picture of their past. But to hear it from the mouth of a survivor, to hear the pain in Miri's voice as she spoke of the horrors her people endured, it was something he hadn't been prepared for. And you were the only one who survived? He asked softly, his voice breaking through the heavy silence. Miri nodded, her small, delicate frame trembling once more. Yes, I was the last. They left me behind, abandoned on a distant world after they had taken what they needed. They didn't think I'd survive. But I did. She glanced up at him, her eyes wide with the weight of the story she had shared. Her hands trembled as she finished the last of the food, the motion slow, deliberate. I'm sorry, Darius said, his voice filled with an emotion he hadn't expected. I had no idea. Miri's gaze softened, though the sadness never fully left her face. I know. Not many do. Humans, you've changed since then, haven't you? I've heard that things are different now. But you're still a human. And I don't know if I can trust you, Darius. The words stung, but Darius understood. He couldn't expect her to just forget everything. He couldn't expect her to erase the centuries of pain and betrayal that her people had endured. But he could try. He could try to change her perception of humanity, to show her that he was different. I'm not like them, Miri, Darius said, his voice firm. And I won't let what happened to your people happen again. I can't undo the past, but I can offer you something more than fear. I want to help you, to protect you. You're not alone anymore. The alien's gaze met his, searching, probing, as if trying to determine the truth of his words. For a long moment, neither of them moved. It was as if the weight of her history, of his species' past, hung between them like an invisible wall. Finally, Miri spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. I want to believe you, Darius. But I can't. Not yet. Darius nodded, his heart heavy but understanding. I can't ask you to. But I can promise you this. I'll show you. In time you'll see. Chapter 3. The Unlikely Ally. The days that followed Darius' encounter with Miri were filled with silence and the slow, tentative building of trust. He had offered her food, offered her comfort, but it was clear that she wasn't ready to completely trust him. And who could blame her? Her people had been betrayed, broken by those who had promised peace but instead brought war. She had every reason to fear him. But Darius couldn't give up. He couldn't allow this tiny alien, so fragile, so full of history and pain, to live her life in fear of humanity. He knew that he could change things, that he could make a difference, even if it meant going against the prejudices and stereotypes that had plagued his species for centuries. The next morning, as Darius awoke, he found Miri already awake, sitting quietly in the corner of the ship's living space. Her large eyes were fixed on the view outside, but she was still distant, lost in her thoughts. He couldn't help but notice how much smaller she seemed in the expansive ship, her delicate form almost invisible against the backdrop of the machinery and technology that filled the room. Good morning, Darius said, breaking the silence. He kept his voice light, trying to offer some semblance of normalcy to their interaction. Miri turned slowly, her gaze flicking to him, before she nodded in acknowledgement. Morning, she replied softly, her voice still laced with uncertainty. Darius smiled faintly as he moved toward the control panel, checking the status of the ship's systems. I was thinking, he began, trying to break the tension, about our next move. We can't stay here long. The planet's atmosphere is unstable, and I'm not sure how long we have before other ships arrive. If we're going to make it, we need to head to a safer location. Miri remained silent for a moment before responding. I don't know where to go, she said quietly. I've been alone for so long. I never thought I would find this. Darius' heart twisted at the loneliness in her voice. You're not alone anymore. I'll protect you, Miri. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Her eyes softened slightly, though the fear was still there, buried beneath layers of distrust and pain. You're different, Darius. But, can I truly trust you? Can I trust humans again? Darius took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I can't change what happened to your people, Miri. But I can show you that not all of us are like that. I'll prove to you that humans can be allies. We can build something better. For the first time since their encounter, Miri looked at him with something other than fear, something that resembled hope. I want to believe you, she whispered. Darius reached out his hand to her, his voice gentle but firm. Then let's take the first step together. As she hesitated, studying his hand, a moment passed between them, quiet, fragile, but full of promise. Slowly, Miri reached out, her small, delicate hand slipping into his. And for the first time, Darius felt that perhaps, just maybe, the divide between their species could be bridged not through grand gestures or promises of peace, but through the simple act of showing trust, even when it seemed impossible. Together, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. As Darius held Miri's tiny hand, the moment felt like a fragile bridge between two worlds, worlds that had never before considered coexistence. Her skin was cool and soft, the sensation strange and foreign in the rough calluses of his own hands. He wondered if, for her, the same thought had crossed her mind, if his human touch, so much larger and seemingly imposing, felt like a symbol of everything she had feared. But in that instant, as her hand remained gently clasped within his, a tentative thread of understanding began to form. It was an unspoken connection, a shared realization that neither of them had expected. The space between their species, once a chasm of distrust, was narrowing ever so slightly. Miri hadn't pulled away, and Darius hadn't forced anything. In silence, they simply existed together, two beings from different worlds bound by something stronger than fear. Darius exhaled, the weight of the moment settling in. I know this isn't easy, he said quietly. But I'll be here, no matter what happens. I'm not going to let you face this alone. We can figure this out, one step at a time. Miri, still holding his hand, gazed up at him with those large, luminous eyes, so full of emotions that Darius could barely decipher them. A small sigh escaped her lips, a sound filled with both resignation and something akin to relief. I don't know what happens next, she whispered, her voice soft but edged with vulnerability. I've been alone for so long, lost in this universe with nowhere to go. I've always been afraid. I thought I'd never find anyone who wouldn't hurt me. But now, her voice trailed off, uncertainty hanging in the air. You'll find a place here, Darius reassured her, squeezing her hand gently. We'll figure it out together. I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you. We'll find a way to stop the fear, one step at a time. For the first time since they had met, Miri looked at him with something approaching trust. Her expression, though still hesitant, softened. Maybe there is something more than fear, something better, she murmured. They stood there in silence for a moment, as the ship's hum reverberated softly beneath their feet. Darius could feel the weight of the uncertainty that hung between them, but it wasn't as oppressive as it had been before. It was the beginning of something, a glimmer of hope that, no matter how small, could still burn brightly enough to light the way forward. Miri finally released his hand, but the tension between them had eased. She was no longer trembling, no longer hiding from him. What do we do now? She asked, her voice quiet, but no longer full of fear. Darius turned toward the control panel, adjusting the ship's systems. The immediate threat of the planet's storm had subsided, but their situation was far from over. He needed to get her to safety away from whatever enemies might still lurk in the shadows, away from her history of pain. I've got a plan, he said, determination creeping into his voice. We'll leave this planet, and I'll take you somewhere safe. A place where you won't have to run anymore. Miri nodded, but her expression grew more somber. You don't know what they'll do to you, to us, when they find out, she said quietly. Humans and aliens, too many worlds hate each other. They'll think I'm dangerous. They'll think you're aiding me. I'm not worried about them, Darius replied firmly. I'm worried about you, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect you. You've been through enough already. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. Thank you, Darius. They locked eyes, and in that quiet, unspoken exchange, something new was born between them, a partnership. A true, unspoken promise that they would face the unknown together. Darius made his way to the cockpit and began powering up the ship's systems, setting a course for a nearby station on the edge of the system. The journey wouldn't be easy, but they had to start somewhere. Miri's past would follow them, no matter where they went, but it was no longer the only thing that defined her. Chapter 4, A New Beginning. As the ether's edge powered up and lifted off from the barren, storm-swept world, the ship surged into the black, leaving behind the planet that had once been the source of so much pain for Miri. They were heading toward the outer rim of the star system, toward a space station isolated, neutral ground. It was a place where they could lay low, regroup, and, perhaps, begin to make sense of the uncertain future that lay ahead. Darius had never intended to find himself entangled in the life of a tiny alien, let alone one so fearful and scarred by the history of his own kind. But here they were, the last thing either of them expected, yet perhaps the beginning of something neither of them had imagined. As they made their way through space, Darius kept a careful eye on the ship's systems. The journey would take several hours, but it was necessary. The storm on the planet's surface had passed, but the dangers of the galaxy were far from over. Darius knew that there were many who would seek to exploit Miri for her knowledge, for her species' technological advancements. He couldn't let that happen. Not on his watch. Miri sat in the corner of the cockpit, her small form tucked into a seat she had only recently grown comfortable with. She was quiet now, but Darius could sense the thoughts swirling in her mind. He knew she had to be thinking about the past, about everything that had been stolen from her. But she wasn't alone anymore. And that thought, as simple as it was, gave Darius a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. You okay? He asked, glancing over at her, his voice soft and casual. Miri nodded, though her eyes still held that distant sadness. I'm still trying to figure it all out, she admitted, her voice low. I don't know what this is, what this means. I don't know how to trust. Darius gave her a small, understanding smile. Trust takes time. I get it. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. You have me. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if looking for any sign of deception. But in his eyes, all she saw was sincerity. And slowly, a tiny, tentative smile tugged at her lips. I didn't think I'd ever meet someone like you, she said quietly. You're different from what I imagined. Darius let out a short laugh, a bit of tension leaving his shoulders. Yeah, well, I'm sure you had some interesting ideas about humans before all this. Miri chuckled softly, a sound that was fragile but genuine. Maybe, but I was wrong about you. You don't want to hurt me. You really want to help. Darius smiled back, the warmth of her words settling over him like a comforting blanket. I do, he said, and I'm not going anywhere. As they continued on their journey, the stars outside grew brighter, the edges of their current space station finally coming into view. The journey had just begun, and though Darius knew they still had a long road ahead, something in him felt different, something that came from knowing that, even in the vast, unpredictable cosmos, there could still be connections, bonds, that defied the odds. Together, Darius and Miri had begun a new chapter not just for her, but for both of them. And whatever the future held, they would face it together. As the hours ticked by, the deep hum of the ship's engines was a constant backdrop to Darius and Miri's quiet companionship. The cold expanse of space stretched endlessly outside the cockpit windows, the distant stars seeming to blink in silent solidarity with their journey. Darius glanced over at Miri occasionally, though he didn't press her for conversation. She was still adjusting, still coming to terms with the strange reality of traveling alongside the very species she had once feared, and he didn't want to rush her. The first few hours had been filled with little more than soft exchanges and a tentative, shared understanding that neither of them fully understood yet. Miri was small, about a foot tall, fragile-looking, but the way she sat, perched on her seat as she gazed out into the vast nothingness of space, was deceptively calm. Her tiny hands rested on her lap, her fingers curling slightly, still unsure whether to reach out or retreat. The long silences between them didn't feel uncomfortable. In a way, they were simply two beings, both lost in their own pasts, moving forward in the only direction they could, towards something unknown. When the space station came into view, Darius felt a sudden tension rise in his chest. The station was on the edge of known space, a neutral place where he had once docked during his earlier travels. It was a large structure, built for trade and as a refuge for those seeking passage through uncharted systems, but it wasn't heavily fortified. It had been years since Darius had visited, and he hoped the old, familiar place would still offer some semblance of safety. Miri, Darius said, his voice breaking the quiet, we'll stop here for a while. It's not perfect, but it's safe enough for now. She looked up from the window, her eyes sharp, still uncertain. You're sure it's safe? Darius nodded, though part of him wasn't sure. The station's neutrality made it a target for bounty hunters, smugglers, and rogue factions who wanted to disappear from the galaxy's prying eyes. But it was the best option they had. As safe as any place in this part of space, he replied. I've been here before. No one's going to ask too many questions. Miri studied him for a moment, her eyes still wide, a mix of trust and fear in them. The weight of everything she had been through, the betrayals, the loss, the constant flight still lingered in the back of her mind. But Darius could see something in her beginning to change. Something was shifting in her gaze, a spark of trust that had not been there before. She was slowly accepting that perhaps, just perhaps, her fear of humans wasn't universal. That maybe, Darius was proof that not all humans were the monsters her species had been taught to fear. You know, Darius said, trying to keep the conversation light. This could be the start of something better. Maybe we'll even find you some answers about your people. Miri's expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. She quickly masked it, but Darius had already seen it. There's nothing left for me, Darius. I'm the last of the Yiri, she said softly. My people are gone. I'm alone. The words hung between them, heavy and full of sorrow. It was a reality Miri couldn't escape, not yet. But Darius wasn't ready to let her sink into that loneliness again. Not when he had promised to protect her, to stand by her. You're not alone anymore, Darius said firmly, his gaze unwavering. You have me, and we'll find a way to make this right, even if it takes time. Miri turned away from him then, her small shoulders slumping slightly, but Darius could see the subtle changes in her. She was listening. She was starting to believe. The docking procedure was simple enough. As Darius maneuvered the ship into the station's hangar bay, he could already feel the weight of what was to come. Miri would be safe here for now, but the deeper question remained. Where would they go next? How could they escape the shadows that hung over them? Not just the fear Miri carried, but the looming presence of the universe's prejudice, of a galaxy that still viewed humans with suspicion, distrust, and hatred. The ether's edge gently came to a stop in the docking bay. The soft hiss of the airlocks confirmed that they had made it. Darius glanced over at Miri, whose tiny hands were gripping the seat tightly, her eyes flicking nervously from side to side. Ready? Darius asked, unstrapping himself from his seat and moving toward the ship's door. Miri nodded, though it was obvious the fear hadn't entirely left her. She followed him out of the ship, her small feet tapping lightly on the cold metal floors as they moved into the bustling hangar. The station was alive with activity, humans, aliens, traders, and travelers all milling about, each of them with their own stories, their own paths. Darius hoped that Miri would see that this place, chaotic and diverse, wasn't the monster-filled world she had feared. They made their way toward the station's central hub, a large open area that served as a marketplace. The air was thick with the sounds of various languages, the hum of commerce filling the space. Miri moved carefully, her eyes wide as she took in the alien sights around her, every creature and being that passed by a new potential threat. But Darius could see her becoming more accustomed to it with each step, her posture slightly more relaxed. Don't worry, Darius whispered. No one here is going to harm you. We're safe. They passed through the marketplace, Darius scanning the crowd for anyone who might take an interest in them, though he didn't sense any immediate danger. Most of the individuals around them seemed preoccupied with their own business, paying little attention to the strange human and his tiny alien companion. But as they neared a corner of the market, Darius froze. His instincts flared to life, and his hand instinctively moved to the side, brushing against the blaster he had holstered under his jacket. He scanned the crowd again, his eyes narrowing as a figure stepped out from the shadows. A tall, cloaked figure, its face obscured, approached them, its steps deliberate and calculated. Darius' heart rate quickened as he recognized the telltale signs of danger. This person wasn't just another traveler. The figure's posture, the way they moved, was unmistakable. They were a hunter. Miri, Darius whispered, stepping slightly in front of her, his voice low but firm. Stay behind me. The hunter's gaze flicked over to them, and for a split second, Darius saw a flash of recognition in the stranger's eyes. The figure's lips curled into a smirk. You shouldn't have come here, human. The hunter's voice was smooth, the tone carrying a warning Darius knew all too well. You've brought the last of the Yiri to the worst place imaginable. Miri stiffened behind Darius, the fear in her eyes returning in full force. Her tiny hands trembled again, and her breath came out in short, shallow bursts. Darius kept his stance firm, ready for anything. What do you want? He demanded, his voice low and steady. He didn't have time for games. The hunter stepped closer, his eyes scanning Darius with cold, calculating intent. I want the Yiri, he said simply, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get her. Before Darius could respond, the air around them seemed to shift. In the distance, a shrill alarm began to blare, signaling an emergency. The station's lights flickered, and suddenly, chaos erupted around them. Miri's small body flinched at the sudden noise, but Darius' attention was fixed on the hunter. He didn't have much time. Run. Darius ordered Miri, his eyes locking onto hers. Now. With one final glance, Darius grabbed Miri's hand and ran, pulling her through the chaos of the marketplace, away from the hunter's grasp. The future, it seemed, was anything but certain. But for now, Darius wasn't going to let anyone take her. Together, they would fight to survive, even if the galaxy was against them.